now we're living in an era of foot dysfunction. The norm is to have foot dysfunction. Okay, most people don't realize it because most people with foot dysfunction do not have foot pain yet. Okay, so a lot of people, the feet aren't doing what they're supposed to, but feet are very robust and they're very resilient. Okay, the way that I think about it is 10,000 years ago, if you were a caveman and your feet hurt so you couldn't run, you got eaten, so you didn't make babies. So our feet evolved to be very, very resilient and robust, and they can take decades of dysfunctional punishment without ever giving you pain. And then people are shocked. They're like, I woke up one morning and my feet hurt, and they've never stopped hurting. It's like, well, that morning you woke up, you didn't do something wrong. You were doing something wrong for 10 years, and only now is your body saying, you need to fix this or it's going to be a big problem. So primary culprits of foot dysfunction, if we try and rank what are the biggest things that affect our feet negatively, I think the biggest thing is our reliance on chairs. Because when we talk about the connection between hip and feet, if your hips don't work, it's very hard to organize your feet in a... And if you can't organize the bones of your foot to be in a nice structural position, then the fascia, the ligaments, and the muscles get overwhelmed, and that's why a lot of people get foot pain. Right? Plantar fasciitis is you're not organizing your feet, so you're having to rely on this hammock of fascia to support your whole body because the bones of your foot cannot create the arches they need to distribute load. Right? So a reliance on chairs, the fact that footwear is not built for human feet, and another big part is actually ineffective current treatment. Right? Because if you've gotten to the point where you develop foot pain, you go to someone, a foot expert or a podiatrist or a physiotherapist, expecting to get help on how to resolve that foot pain, you get put in a temporary solution that gives you slight relief from symptoms, but actually makes the problem worse long term. Makes it harder to resolve the root cause of that problem. Okay, so reliance on chairs, footwear that isn't meant for human feet, and the fact that we don't treat feet effectively, those are the big culprits for why we have an epidemic of foot dysfunction. And as a personal trainer, you might be the first person to tell someone that the feet aren't doing what they're supposed to. So if you're a health professional, assess people barefoot. I'm telling you, it makes a huge... You can tell so much from what people's feet are doing. Like Mike said before, feet are a glimpse into how your hips are functioning. You can tell a lot from feet. Your feet are a reflection of what you do with them. Okay? So if someone comes into the clinic and they got really gnarly feet, crooked toes, all this kind of stuff, it's not genetics. Okay, I promise you, it's the path of your entire life until now and how you use your feet and what kind of footwear you put them in directly shows as a result of how your feet look and function right now. The beauty behind that is that the human body changes, doesn't matter how old or how dysfunctional you are, it will change. If you expose it to the right stuff, it adapts. Okay, your tissues change frequently, your body changes frequently. You just have to expose it to the right stuff so that it changes in a good direction instead of a bad direction. Okay? Pain-free dysfunction, we talked about that. Most people that have dysfunctional feet don't have pain, which is why most people don't realize they have dysfunctional feet. And yeah, same thing, your body changes. Okay, so always, people need to be sold on the fact that they can make a difference in their body. Because we see a lot of people that are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're just like, this is what it is, stuck with this. It's like, well, not really. Because if you wanted to do the side splits in a year from now and you worked at it, you could do it. Even if you're the most inflexible human in the world right now. You can change. You just got to be consistent, and you got to get rid of the bad things before you even start correcting, and then things happen very quickly. Yep. Yeah, unless you cannot move, unless you're stuck in a bed and there's nothing you can do about it, your body will change if you do the right stuff to it. Okay, it might change slower later in life. The tissues might be slower to adapt, but they're not that much slower, and they always change.
And you're going to develop more safety too. It's a lot of my older clients, I'll get them barefoot, and their balance just shoots through the roof. A lot of times they're wearing it's the opposite of what we want in a lot of cases. They're wearing really built up shoes, especially the elderly populations that I see. It's like they're wearing bricks, padded bricks on their feet. And it'll take them off and you can already see just them walking. It's a different experience, right? Just from feeling the ground, right? And that plays a huge part in preventing falls and things like that when people age.
And why are they wearing bricks? Because the people that are trying to take care of this person think that wearing bricks is good for your feet. I had a lady one time that came in, she was told by her doctor to never take shoes off, even in the shower. This lady was in her early 70s. You want to tell someone in their early 70s the most dangerous thing to do? Wear shoes in the shower. Shower's already a really dangerous place. Okay, take away your sensory input. It's like, but here's the thing, the doctor wasn't trying to get this lady to break her hip. The doctor's trying to help this lady with whatever knowledge that doctor has at the time. Right? So I think we just have to take the mindset that everyone in the health community is trying to help other people, but if they don't have the right information or quality information, it can actually harm other people. So we just got to get those things back aligned. We got to have a conversation instead of trying to do this perspective or defend your position. It's like we're all on team help people. Okay, let's get to the truth and get to the most effective way to help people. And if you're not on that team, then go somewhere else, because you shouldn't be helping people on a day-to-day basis as part of your profession if you're not determined to find better ways of doing things and staying current with what we know. Right? There's way more knowledge now than there was 20 years ago, but people are still doing stuff from 20 years ago, seemingly not really caring about updating the way they're doing things. So, this is a good quote by Da Vinci. The human foot is a masterpiece of engineering and a work of art, and it really is. It's very shocking at how advanced our foot is, right? Like, Elon Musk can shoot a Tesla into space. I've never seen a robot that walks as fluidly and beautifully as a human being. Why? Because it's an extremely complex process that all of us do every day and we take for granted. Okay, there's crazy feedback loops involved in taking a 200-pound body, standing on two tiny little flippers, and not letting it fall over on its face, just walking straight, let alone walking over a curb, over rocks, jumping, running. Like, it's pretty amazing that we can move this well. And when you look at the feet and the role they play, even just the foot itself, it has to do two polar opposite jobs. It has to become a rigid lever so that when we push off, it gives us something to push off on. And it also has to be this malleable mobile adapter so that it can adapt to uneven terrain and absorb impact. Those are two opposite ends of a continuum, but the foot has to do both, and that's part of the reason why it's so complex.
And you can think of the foot as like a gyroscope too. So when I looked at you guys all on one feet, you were all trying to find where your neutral foot was, right? You didn't even think you were doing that, but you were. Because when you found where your neutral foot was, you had your balance, right? So at all times, the feet are kind of this gyroscope. And again, everything upstream is trying to get us to this point where we're nice and kind of even over the feet. So when we're on them, we're not going to fall over. And a lot of times when we see dysfunctional feet, that plays a huge part in balance. And it creates all of this unnecessary stiffness and muscle tension and all that upstream. Because now we have to use a bunch of other stuff to help us get the stability we need. But again, there's this sweet spot we'll talk about next. And if you're doing the right thing and getting out of your body's way, you're going to just train this sweet spot over and over and over in training, walking around, daily life. And that's huge, right? So this software, even though it's complex, it doesn't need to be complex to train it, right? And that's what we want to kind of demystify here.
Yeah, and even like right now, we'll talk about anatomy, and even though the foot is crazy complex, what you need to know to reclaim a foot that does what it's supposed to is so simple. It's not complex at all. So we're not going to go deep into anatomy because we don't have to in order to kind of achieve the goal of restoring functional feet. But just as a baseline, 26 bones, 33 joints in each foot, and 4 layers of muscle, tons of fascia, ligaments, very busy area. Okay? A joint evolves or is adapted into a species because there's supposed to be movement there. Right? I don't have a joint in the middle of my forearm because I don't have the bend from there, but I need one at my elbow so I can feed myself and throw things. Right? You have 33 joints in each of your feet. Think about that. That's insane. That's a lot of motion. And the fact that most shoes allow virtually no motion at all, it's really no wonder that our joints seize up in our feet, because our shoes that we spend most of our waking hours in, when we're on our feet, do not permit any motion in those joints. Now, what happens to a joint when it doesn't move? It gets stiff. What happens to the muscles that cross that joint if the joint stops moving? They go on holiday. They don't need to be there. Right? The body's all about efficiency. If a joint doesn't move, the muscle that crosses that joint doesn't have to do anything. So it goes on holidays, it shrinks, it atrophies, it withers away, your brain's awareness of that muscle goes away. So if we spend all day in shoes that don't let our joints move in our foot, the joints get stiff, the muscles go away, and that's why we're all left with really stiff and weak feet. Okay? But it's pretty simple to get out of that. So 26 bones, 33 joints, 4 layers of muscle. That's in just the foot itself. Okay, now when we mobilize the foot and get it moving, or when you spend time in shoes that allow your foot to function like it's barefoot, you start to get all of that mobility in those joints back. You start to reactivate the muscles in the foot to get them to do their job again. So it's fairly simple. Just get out of the bad stuff, and your foot wants to do what it's supposed to. We just have to get out of its way, basically.
So the ankle, just looking upstream from the foot, very, very important. It's one of those linchpin areas. Dorsiflexion seems to be one of the most limited. You'll see, we tested that, you need a wall. And that's basically when your knee is tracking kind of over your foot like this. And that'll show up in a lot of patterns, right? So if you're squatting, if you're lunging, if you're walking down a flight of stairs, you require a certain amount of dorsiflexion just to do it kind of sustainably. One of the biggest complaints that I see with people with knee pain is what hurts the most, like it's going downstairs, right? Going upstairs, stairs. So everyone needs to do a lot of these things. You know, just your elderly patient, they still need a certain amount of dorsiflexion to be able to do the patterns that they need to do. Walking requires a certain amount of dorsiflexion. Runners, you need a lot of dorsiflexion. If you think of the ankle, picture it as a shock absorber, right? So it really helps kind of absorb shock and help position our foot in a better spot. But the ankle's working not only through dorsiflexion, it's also working in this this plane too. So we've got the subtalar joint. We're not going to touch on that too much, but really, if you think about it as the shocks in a vehicle, if you have really stiff shocks in a vehicle, it's going to send a lot of impact through that vehicle. So it's important that we both extend and gain use of those shocks and kind of extend the shocks. And we'll talk about tuning them next, actually at the end, in terms of runners. A lot of runners have really stiff shocks, and they're not using that to generate elasticity and torque. So the ankle, just think dorsiflexion, really important, shows up in a lot of patterns. Plantar flexions, when you point your toes, it's the opposite way too. Getting that whole ankle moving gives you a degree of freedom. So bringing that whole joint through range is going to help you with push off and things like that. And again, subtalar motion, really important too. We'll talk about ways to restore some of this. Lower leg muscles, it's basically, think about the, if you look at the picture of the foot core, so actually if you look at the picture of the foot and all the layers of muscle that Nick just talked about, all of those are responsible for helping keep your foot in its spot, in its place when you want to gain stability. Everything above the foot is responsible for helping place the foot where we want it, right? And that's why treating the foot in isolation just with towel crunches and things like that is not an effective way to actually ingrain everything. So lower leg, basically think of all these muscles as a part of the stability network. They're helping to position things downstream. They're also helping to turn the foot into both a mobile adapter and a rigid lever. So it has to be both, as Nick said too. So when you're impacting with the ground, these muscles help eccentrically kind of control your impact and then actually create propulsion and rigidity as you push off. Because it's both. You have to be a very good mobile adapter. When you're walking, a lot of people aren't even concerned about that, and we'll talk about that in the walking section. So buffer impact, adapt to the ground, and then create rigidity and push off the ground. The lower leg is like a workhorse, and all these muscles are working together and doing their thing when you're just mindful about things. And again, we want to simplify things because you can, it's like training the rotator cuff, right? You can take every muscle and be like, okay, well, the infraspinatus does this, so we need to do 4 different exercises to train the rotator cuff, or we can just do things that get it working all as one unit. And that's what we try to do with the feet too.
And that's the takeaway with the lower leg muscles is everyone's being told, oh, you have some sort of itis, opathy, or osis, right? I have tib post tendonitis, tib post tendinopathy, Achilles tendonitis. It's like all those mean is that upstream and downstream from that lower leg is not doing what it's supposed to. If your hip and your foot do not do what they're supposed to, then those lower leg muscles get overwhelmed and you'll get any of those itis, osis, whatever. But the take-home message is it doesn't matter how much massage you do for a tib post or how many isolated movements you do to get tib post back on, until your hip and your foot do what they're supposed to, tib post is always going to get overwhelmed because it's doing the job it's supposed to do plus the job of the hip and the foot, because neither of these two places are doing their jobs. Right? And that's where this isolation approach to treating body parts or specific tendons or muscles doesn't really get you anywhere very quick or long term, because that's not the root cause of the problem. That's a byproduct of the problem. And by treating that isolated area, you're not treating the problem, you're treating the symptom.
That's the thing. Classically, we like to look at things from the knee down when we're treating ankles and feet, but that's not going to be the way to do it. And oftentimes it's these muscles are overloaded because everything upstream of them is not doing their job to help out. So really what we want to get across today is the whole chain. It's everything, right? Your core matters a lot, and we'll get into it. We're going kind of, as you can see, from the ground all the way up, and then by the end we're going to kind of integrate everything. And I think that's the best approach to take. But it's not the fault of your lower leg that your arch, these things help support the arch, right? Everything is supportive of the arch, and a lot of times when we see things like plantar fasciitis, all of the stuff that's supposed to help support that arch is not doing its job, right? So some structures like the plantar fascia have to do a lot more. But just know everything has a role to play, but if we do the right things and look for and we simplify things, we can get everything, again, we can take away these roadblocks and we don't have to isolate everything along the way. So,
okay, close notes on the way we're thinking about things right now. Your hips position your feet. Your foot can then fire muscles to hold it in a stable position once it's been positioned by your hips. So your hips place your feet, your foot can hold itself stable. It's just like the core, right? The foot core concept came from Irene Davis. So she worked at Harvard at the Spalding National Running Institute. Very smart lady. Came up with the concept of the foot having a core just like our body has a core, right? Whenever someone says the word core, you think abs, right? You think midsection of the body. The job of the core is to hold things stable once they've been aligned posturally. Okay, so your core doesn't pull you into alignment. You've got to align your body, stack all the joints, then the core fires. Then the core can actually fire. It's not inhibited, because when you walk around like this, your core can't fire. The muscles aren't in the right position to fire. You align yourself, the core holds things stable. With the foot, if your hip cannot position your foot, and we're going to talk about that directly next, if your hip cannot position your foot, the core of your foot, so the intrinsic muscles of the foot that both originate and end within the foot itself, cannot do their job to hold the foot stable if you're not even able to position the foot. And you have to do both. Okay? You can work on foot strength all you want, but if your hips don't do their job to position the foot, all the work you did for a strong foot is kind of wasted. Okay? So hips position the foot, the muscles of the foot can hold the foot stable once it's been positioned properly.
And when we say hips position the foot, just because they can generate the most amount of torque, so they play the biggest role in that. Like we just talked about, the lower leg also plays a role. So everything above the foot, its role is to do that gyroscope thing. Find where neutral is, and it's like, oh, there we go. Now we can actually use the core. Because again, if you're trying to access the core of the foot, you can't do it here if we can't actually even grip the ground. You can't do it out here, right? It's that middle ground, and everything above it, boom. Once we find that and we train that, we're going to ingrain that over time.
Okay, let's get everyone standing up. So I want to show you guys, when someone comes into the clinic and I look at their feet, what I actually look at in terms of assessing visually their foot is way simpler than what I think a lot of people think. So I want to show you what goes through my brain when I look at someone's feet. Someone comes in the clinic, first thing I get them to do is take their shoes and socks off, which people don't like to do. It's very weird. I had a lady come in, I was like, okay, well, what's the main area you're coming to see me for? My feet hurt. Perfect. Okay, take off your shoes. Oh, I don't want to take the shoes off. What? You want to treat your shoes? I can't be able to see your feet. But she was self-conscious about the fact that her feet stink. And when I explained to her that your feet only stink because you keep them in shoes all day, she wears shoes way less now, and her feet don't stink as much, and she likes going barefoot. So I think it's one of those things where we look at feet as these gross, nasty things that we hide away in shoes that are all mangled because of the shoes we wear, where we have to flip the switch and be like, shoes are the reason why you're self-conscious about this and why that's even there. So when people understand that, she's like, oh, really? I didn't know that. Part of me is like, oh my God, it seems so simple. But I think to the masses, they really don't know anything about feet and they're not being taught this stuff. So you almost have to speak about it at like a 10-year-old level, because that's where most people are with their awareness of their feet. So when I get someone in the clinic, take their shoes off, maybe after some coaching to take the shoes off. And then I get them to just walk on the spot. Okay, so they just walk on the spot. We're in Canada, it's cold, a lot of talk about the weather, distract them basically, okay? Then they stop. The first thing I look at is what position do their feet stop in, okay? Because this is a very telling thing about how they might walk around, right? Jay Deshary has a good line. How you stand is how you land. So if you're concerned about how a runner's landing when they're running, look at how they're standing, because that's probably going to be a direct reflection of how they land when they run. So when I look down, I look at foot alignment, okay? Are their feet straight? Biomechanically, our feet and ankles work optimally when our feet are parallel and straight. Everyone's bodies are built a bit differently. Yes, everyone has different hip sockets. So, people like to say, oh, well, some people are built so that they have to be like this. I'm like, well, okay, that might make a bit of sense, but I really think that everyone should try and walk with their feet straight.
It matters most when we're walking, exactly.
Yeah. So I look at foot position. That's the first thing I look at. Next thing I look at is toe alignment, right? When I look at foot position, I'm looking for, did they stop like this with their feet duck foot facing out? Did they stop with their feet internally rotated? Was one foot there and the other foot straight? Like, that tells you a lot about how they're posturally they're aligned, or how their brain recognizes neutral. Then I look at their toe alignment, okay? Do their toes fan out away from each other? Does their foot get wider as it goes to the front? Or does it get narrower? Is their big toe leaning over towards the other guys? Are the toes literally overlapping with each other? At rest, are their toes bent, curled, flexed? Are they doing weird things? Do they have hammer toes? So I visually just look. What are their toes doing? The next thing I look at is the medial arch. Okay, the foot has multiple arches, but really the only one that's relevant to me when I look at someone is the arch on the inside of their foot. Okay, number one, is it there? Do they have one? Okay, because arches are a continuum. Some people have a high arch, some people have a low arch. Everyone should have an arch. Okay, some sort of area under like if your foot is a flat meat pancake, there's something missing upstream that we got to work on. Okay, but don't get too caught up in saying, oh, I want perfect arches, or my arch isn't like nice and uniform or nice and high. Don't get caught up with that, but you should have an arch. If you don't, I'm going to show you how you can kind of start to understand how your hips affect your ability to form an arch. Okay, so hip torque. Where does the arch creation of your foot come from? Chiefly, it comes from your hips. So if you have dysfunctional hips that can't do what they're supposed to, you're probably going to have flatter feet. Okay? So in terms of hip torque, All I get people do, people come in all the time, like, I got flat feet, I've had them forever, I was born with them, it's genetic, blah, blah, blah. My favorite thing to do with that person is show them that they can actually create an arch. And you do that by cueing them on how to create torque at their hips. So I get them to stand with their feet straight, shoulder width apart. Okay, the next thing I get them to do is I say, I never want your foot to leave the ground. I pretend there's super glue under your foot, it never comes off the ground. And what I want you to do is bend your knees slightly. Now I want you to look at the arches of your feet. Without letting your feet come up, I want you to push your knees apart from each other. Okay? And then relax. And then push your knees apart from each other. And look what that does to the arch of your foot. Does it do anything to change the arch of your foot? Does it lift the arch up? And in almost everyone, it will. Sometimes only to a small amount, but it changes their arch. And the person that thinks they've had flat feet forever and they're genetic is like, what? I have an arch? It's like, well, yeah. It's created by your hip. And what you did there was consciously generate torque at your hips to position your foot in a better spot. And for a lot of people, that's work, right? If they have very poor rotation at their hip, it's like they're fighting against their own body's resistance to kind of generate that torque and basically wind up their hip joint. But that can be their default eventually.
I'll do that in cue with the glutes too.
Yeah.
So another cue I like to do, so that's kind of the initial one. It's like you can affect that position of the foot based on what things upstream are doing. I'll also do, like, after they get that, I'll say, as you push your knees out, try to stand tall and squeeze your glutes, right? Squeeze your butt, right? So straighten everything out, squeeze the butt, let everything go a little bit. Stand up tall, squeeze the glutes, push your knees out a little bit, and let go. And what I'll do is I'll go through reps of this. Let's go through about 10 right now. So stand up tall, squeeze the butt, let go. Stand up tall, squeeze the butt, let go. And oftentimes, I'll tell them after I do this a little bit, look down at your feet as you squeeze your butt. And what does your butt do? Your butt actually connects right down to the floor where your arches are, right? So I'll take away all these cues of even pushing the knees out afterwards and be like, just squeeze your bum now, right? And they're like, oh, my arches show up when I squeeze my bum. And what are we doing here? We're essentially getting, when we squeeze our butt, we're actually posteriorly pelvic tilting. So we're getting into position. That's creating that torque. The glutes are torque creators too. So that's actually showing up at the floor. Back to that posture shows up at the floor. So it depends what the position is upstream, right? All I'm doing is just aligning my pelvis better, squeezing my glutes, posteriorly pelvic tilting, and boom, we've created that torque. So if we think about the opposite of that, what is the opposite of that? If we actually tilted our pelvis all the way forward, things would want to internally rotate in. And where do a lot of us happen to be these days? We tend to be influenced from all these muscles in the front of our pelvis, and that really, you hear it all the time, waking the glutes up. Why does everyone go to a trainer to get their it's glutes and core. They're like, we're going to train your glutes and core all day. Why is this, right? And a big part of it is all these restrictions that we have in the front of our hip. And this comes back to, like, what do we do with our bodies, right? So a lot of it is the sitting that we do that creates some of these restrictions, which we'll get into in the hip section. But just knowing that something as simple as finding a way in with your clients to be like, hey, when you squeeze your butt, your arch forms, right? So it's not because your feet are genetically flat and you can't do anything about it. You've just proven me you can. Now we just got to make sure we just got to figure out what's a sustainable way to do this so we can turn it into a long-term solution, right? And then we got to figure out a little bit deeper, why is it that you're having so much trouble creating that and maintaining that torque?
We'll talk about it more when we get into hips, but let's be real. Your glutes aren't firing is the silliest thing to say. If they weren't firing, you'd be on the floor, okay? Because you can't stand without your glutes. They're just not firing in the right patterns. So, if you have a hip dysfunction that's stopping your glutes from firing in the right patterns of going into extension, you can't bridge your way out of a hip dysfunction. Okay, you got to offset what's causing the problem. It's just like core. Oh, you got a weak core. It's like, well, maybe it's not weak. Maybe it's just inhibited because your posture's whack. So you can't plank out of weird posture. You have to open up the muscles that are causing you to be pulled into bad posture. Then your core works just like it's supposed to, right? And with no planks necessary. Yep. Yeah, I would look upstream. So with him, I want to see what his squat looks like, what his lunge looks like, what's his ankle range of motion like. Like I would do a global movement assessment, see what his main joint hardware is like, and then you have to find a way to get buy-in from him, right? So saying, oh, if you work on your feet, you're not going to get hurt as much, he doesn't give a shit about getting hurt because it's only relevant when he gets hurt. But if you say, I can make you run faster because the arch of your foot acts like a spring, and when you run, if you don't use those springs, you're using way more energy to run with than if you don't have that spring. So that you just got to find a way in, because a lot of times having super flat feet is an indication that their hips aren't doing what they're supposed to. You know, those, I treat a lot of, like, you treat high-level athletes, the highest level athletes are oftentimes the best compensators. You think they'd be the best movers, but a lot of times they're just the best at covering up their restrictions, and they're so genetically gifted or so motivated that they just plow through it. Those are also the people that break down once a year, every year, and that, you know, so.
It matters for other things too. Like you say, maybe they don't have foot pain, but oftentimes they'll be like, oh, but my back hurts and my knees hurt, and it's like, okay, well, now we've got to talk about that. So it's the whole chain we look at. So when somebody comes in and their back hurts, their knees hurt, we got to look at, okay, how are you squatting? How are you standing on the leg? When we see the flat foot show up, well, that's a big contributor to why this is happening, right? So you're right. A lot of times they don't have pain in the foot, but they'll have pain somewhere else, or performance will be robbed somewhere else, or whatever it is. So,
your question, Nina? No, we're not. Trust me, I got a lot of shit I'm still working on. Yeah. It's because your body's using an improper stability strategy, right? So
but
it's more than an hour.
The biggest thing is though, like what research is showing is you need to keep moving. Like the moving frequently. So even if you have a stand-up desk, one of the big things about that is it allows you to move more. I'll coach people to put a little stool under their desk. They'll put one foot up, other foot up, stand wide, stand narrow, stand 1 foot in front. That is just going to be a way more beneficial way. Because yeah, you can stand as best as you want, but it's not natural to stand in one spot all the time. And it's going to, like even for me, it's just, it starts to hurt if I just stand there for 2 hours.
Static positions being what's bad, not just sitting. Right, so it's all about the dose of one position. Standing just gives you more variety. Like the only time I sit is to drive, and I don't drive that often, so I'm standing. But a lot of times, like if I get sore, if I'm at my computer and I stand for 30 minutes and I sort of get sore, I just adopt a different position. So it's not about what is the limit a human can stand in one position for. It's no human's supposed to be in one position for long at all. So it's find variety, and some of that might be sitting. Right, sitting is not a bad thing. Just like salt's not a bad thing, but if you eat a pound of salt, you're dead. If you sit 10 hours a day, it's going to mess you up. So I think that was probably a weird way of answering your question, but hopefully that, yeah. So hip torque. Hips control your feet. Hips align your feet. Then your feet can fire to hold themselves stable, but your hips have to do their job first. Okay, both things are like this. One has to happen in order for the other one to do its job. Current treatment. So we won't spend long on this. We have the TFC Audio Project is a podcast we started because even in the seminar, we often find there's not enough time to fully unpack a very complex topic. Okay, Instagram is the extreme of that, right? You put a post on orthotics, everyone gets pissed because it's like, yeah, I'm taking a huge multivariable problem and giving a little snippet of information. I'm not saying that's the be-all and end-all, but having long conversations for an hour about one single topic like orthotics allows us to unpack and explain the complexity of this whole thing. It's not one thing. It's not orthotics are good or bad. It's, okay, how are people using orthotics? Why are they being used? Is it a good thing to address the problem they're coming in with? The closed note to this is most people have problems with their feet because they have stiff, weak feet. Okay, they spend time in shoes that support their arch, or they've never loaded their feet, or the shoes are stiff, so they have stiff, weak feet. If someone comes into the clinic with a stiff, weak neck, I don't put them in a neck brace for the rest of their life. That'd be silly. That's what orthotics do a lot of times for feet. And it's not that orthotics are never necessary, right? Someone has a whiplash, maybe they go in a neck brace for like a month as they're working on their neck strength and mobility. But it's not a solution, it's a tool. And so I think the thing with orthotics is, if you take a stiff, weak foot and you give it arch support, all of a sudden, any strength that you did have no longer has to be there because it's, the support is being done for the foot. The muscles of the foot don't have to hold up the arch because it's being done for it. If the foot is stiff and you put it in a rigid insert, it's going to get stiffer because you've all of a sudden taken away some movement. And everyone demonizes pronation or the foot flattening out. You need that. That's actually what allows your foot to act like a spring. So if you put something in there to support the arch of your foot, you no longer have any travel in your suspension of your foot. You can't use those springs anymore because it's rigid. It's stuck in one position.
Foot needs to be dynamic, right? So that's the biggest thing. And a lot of times these arch supports prevent its ability to be dynamic and act dynamic. So that's going to change the way you interact with the ground and all of that. And back to the next point is that if the root cause of why you have foot pain is because your arches aren't supported naturally, then that's the thing you need to work on, as opposed to further unloading them. And the concept of just adapting and being able to buffer and tolerate load is something that we need to explore more. Part of that is when you stand up on your feet, now you're having to buffer that load a lot more. You have more time under tension just by being on your feet more. But again, it's what your archers are doing to support themselves.
And two big things that are because there's a lot of really smart podologists out there that are prescribing orthotics, and they're very smart people. So I would think of like, why are these people prescribing something that I see as so incongruous with what we actually have to be doing? And there's two things. If you assume the foot can never change, and you negate and you forget that the foot's attached to your hips, orthotics make a whole lot of sense biomechanically, right? The foot is flat, it can't unflatten itself, and it's not attached to the hips. Stick something in there to support it. Makes a lot of sense. But when you know that the foot can change, if something's stiff, you can mobilize it. If something's weak, you can strengthen it. The foot abides by the same physiological principles as anywhere else in our body. And when you realize that the foot has a lot to do with what your hips are doing, then orthotics make very little sense, because you just have to train those other areas, right? So it's like an isolation approach to an integration problem. That's why orthotics is still so popular. In Canada, it's extreme. I'm telling you, we live in Ottawa. It's a federal government town. Everyone has federal government insurance coverage. Almost everyone has $500 a year to buy new orthotics. A year. That is a lot of money being wasted to put people in something that's actually making the problem worse. So it's a bigger conversation, right? People like simple solutions. But when you say the main reason your feet don't work is because your hips are messed up because you sit all day, then it's like, oh my God, you just rocked my world. And they're just like, I'll just take the orthotics. It's simpler. It's like, so I think that's part of the reason. So said principle, specific adaptation to impose demand. Whatever you expose your body to, it adapts accordingly. If you support the arch loses the ability to support itself. If you restrict the joints from moving, they get stiff. And there's really not that much research to support their use. The research that's out there says orthotics are good for one big thing. They reduce pain, right? But if I have shoulder pain and I drink 10 beers, I can have less pain too. But that's not a good metric. It's just not a good metric to work with.
And they reduce pain in the short term too. So studies don't show good long-term effectiveness of it. And also studies show that the effectiveness of its pain-reducing capacity is oftentimes they compared store-bought versus custom-made, and no significant difference statistically between the two. So if you're thinking temporary pain relief, then maybe a store-bought one is your way to go. If in the case you need it temporarily to unload your foot with the purpose of loading it back up and gaining strength so you no longer need it. The end goal is to always not need it, and if you do happen to use it, then know why you're using it and then kind of work your way towards that. That's the biggest message.
Foot R&R, restoration reintegration. This is meat and potatoes of how to speed up recovery of your foot. So the goal with all this stuff is to go from normal feet to natural feet, from stiff feet to mobile feet, from weak feet to strong feet, okay? This is the start. This is the extra stuff that if you want to speed up the progress, this is stuff you can ingrain in your day-to-day routine. So we're going to start with hardware, okay? If you have joint motion, you're going to have muscle activity, so we're going to start with hardware, because without the joint being able to move like it's supposed to, you can't get the muscles back to doing what they're supposed to, okay? So we're going to do foot and ankle. We'll speed it up a little bit because we're taking a little bit longer than usual. So lacrosse plantar release is what we're going to start with. So everyone grab the lacrosse ball. Okay, and then we're going to go through the foot. We're going to go through the ankle. We're going to talk about big toe as well. So we're going to go through all this. If something hurts, modify accordingly. Don't put as much pressure, right? We're going to give different kind of ways to scale, to progress and regress this stuff. Okay, so if something hurts, just modify. Don't do it through pain. So first one, taking a lacrosse ball to the bottom of your foot. Okay, everyone should have grabbed a lacrosse ball. Included in today's, included in the registration price, you get a lacrosse ball and toe spreaders. So make sure you grab one. So first one, this one's a real simple one. Okay, it's literally massage the bottom of your foot with the lacrosse ball. People always ask, oh, what is this working on? Releasing? It's releasing everything. Okay, the muscles, the joints, the fascia, everything. It's non-specific, which is part of the beauty of it. So the minimum effective dose that we found for a lot of people is 2 minutes, twice a day for 2 weeks. That's just what we found by working with patients. And that's not to say if you had painful feet for 10 years, it's going to go away in 2 weeks, but you should feel a difference in 2 weeks if you're consistent with doing it. So the hardest part is just people being consistent. Okay? Now, just to give you an idea of what you should be able to do if your foot's not stiff and locked up, you should be able to stand on a lacrosse ball with one foot and not feel like your foot's going to blow up. Most people find that really gnarly. And like, I couldn't do that. I couldn't even think of doing that a long time ago. But if you work on it, it gets better. Okay, so those 2 minutes. I'm not saying everyone do that right now, but I'm just saying that's a good indicator. Like the muscular part. So like the middle, the meaty part of the arch. If your muscles are tight and locked up, that hurts. Muscles that are locked up hurt the pressure. Muscles that aren't locked up shouldn't hurt the pressure. So the 2 minutes, what does it consist of? Number one, the first minute is the only area you don't have to roll on is your heel bone. Everywhere else is fair game. So you start by going up and down, start on the inside arch of the foot. You go up and down, and you slowly roll up and down and work yourself towards the outside of your foot. You just go back and forth. Okay, how much pressure should you put? Well, this shouldn't be fun. It shouldn't tickle, but you shouldn't want to square and make weird faces. Okay, so tolerable discomfort is what I tell people. It's like a deep massage. Okay, the foot can take a lot, so you can put a decent amount of pressure, but if you have to limp around or your feet are sore the rest of the day, you probably push too hard. So part of that is you got to self-regulate. Okay, up and down for 60 seconds. The second minute is you put your heel bone on the floor, get the ball at the base of your pinky toes, use your heel as a pivot point, and all I want you to do is go back and forth. Okay, so you go one way and the other way, and when you do that, if you do that at the base of your toes, what you'll see is the bones of your foot, your metatarsals, actually splay open and kind of cup around the ball. And that's good because that opens up the foot, which is the opposite of the foot getting compressed in shoes. Okay, so you start forward and back, just kind of mushing side to side, and then slowly work your way more towards the heel. Okay, so you don't have to go on the heel bone, but just start at the base of the toes, go back and forth, and then slowly work back towards your heel. Beware, some people at the front of their heel bone will have like a little heel spur or a tender area from the plantar fascia getting pulled on. So if it's really exquisitely tender, really painful, don't keep pushing in that one area, right? So modify and kind of use pressure as tolerated. That's the best way I can say it, because as time goes on, a lot of people are like, oh, it still hurts a bit when I do it. And then the first thing I ask them is, well, are you pushing harder now than you were before? And almost always they're like, oh, I'm pushing way harder. So if it's the same level of discomfort, but with way more pressure, net positive, right? Your muscles are loosening up, your joints are opening up. Okay, so 2 minutes, twice a day, for 2 weeks, minimum effective dose, up and down for a minute, side to side for a minute, with as much pressure as you can tolerate, okay, without making weird faces and without limping around after. Try the other foot as well. Almost always there's going to be one foot that's more tender than the other. That's okay, right? And some people literally, just the weight of their leg will be enough to be uncomfortable, because people's feet are hardly ever exposed to anything but flat, cushy, hard surfaces. So the minute you're starting to expose it to texture and point pressures in these muscles, you can feel terrible. Okay, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means your foot's really stiff and you got to work on it. Okay, so that's the plantar release. Very simple, very powerful as a way to speed up your joints moving again and the muscles releasing. Okay. Next one, midfoot articulation. The middle of your foot is supposed to be able to, the front of your foot and the back of your foot are supposed to be able to move independently. Your midfoot is supposed to have some articulation. This one you see commonly where someone will go down and do a squat. Okay, their knees will cave in. You'll say push your knees out, but keep your feet on the floor. Anytime they push their knees out, their foot pops up. And they can't do one without the other. And that person oftentimes just has no articulation in their midfoot. So I'm going to show you guys how to mobilize that. Let's get everyone sitting down. Okay? This one's another real simple one. I like simple stuff because it's hard. I like stuff that's hard to screw up. Okay? So they have to be simple explanations. With this one, what I do is I'll put cup one hand under the bottom of my foot, other hand goes on top. Literally all you're doing is trying to twist and wring your foot, like you're trying to wring out a cloth. So you go like this, and you just twist your foot. I like oscillating mobilization, so I'll twist it as far as I can go without getting pain, hold for about a second, and then I relax. I twist it, and I relax. And I might do like 10 or 20 of those. It really doesn't matter, right? Just get it moving. Another way to do it is wind up tension in the foot so that you're at the limit, and then use your hip to kind of do little pumps to kind of twist the foot. So you're just trying to like literally the back of the foot, the front of the foot, twist them and get it moving again. It's not one specific joint, it's a group of joints in the middle of your foot, but they have to be able to move and articulate. Okay? So you do that on one side, you try it on the other side as well. You might hear a crack or a pop sometimes, and that just means that basically you took a joint that wasn't moving a whole lot, you got it moving again. So just be responsible with this, right? Don't do it to the point of pain, but I can twist my foot pretty good. Like that midfoot can really take almost needs a lot of strength to be put into it to mobilize it. Okay, and you can either just do small little oscillations like this, or you can put it at its limit and do little pumps, because your hip joint has a lot of power that it can use to kind of move the hind foot in a different direction. So that's mid-foot articulation. Very simple stuff, right? Easy to do, hard to screw up. That's the second one. Now, I have calf reset written on here. We're not going to get everyone to go through a calf mobilization, but the reason I put it in there is because doing some tissue work on your calf is part of the equation to restoring something like ankle mobility, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Okay, because if I looked at how I treated a tight ankle 2 years ago, I would assess their ankle range. I'd say, okay, your ankles are tight, perfect, let's do calf tissue work. And I would get in there and do like 20 minutes of calf tissue work, and it would improve it a little bit. But what I didn't realize was that the only reason that person's calf is jacked up and tight is because if they can't extend their hip, their calf's probably trying to do the work of their glute and their calf. Right? So it's more about finding out, why is the calf getting so tight? Once you solve that problem, then working on the calf tissue and loosening it up is important. Right? And the way to do that is you take one of those bigger tissue work balls, like I use softballs in the clinic because they're cheap and they're inexpensive. It's like when a ball is supposed to do work on muscles, all of a sudden it quadruples the price of that ball. It's very weird. So that's why I like the cross balls. It's $5. So with calf tissue work, you might put pressure in the calf and go up and down. You might go side to side. You might just put pressure in one spot and then pump your ankle a bunch of times. Right? It doesn't really matter how you do it. Okay, you don't have to put insane amounts of pressure. So same thing, tolerable discomfort, maybe for a minute or two. Okay, if when you did your ankle test, the biggest area that you felt tension was in the back of your Achilles tendon and your calf, that's an indicator that probably a little bit of calf tissue work can go a long way for you. Okay, but it's part of the equation, and it's not the be-all and end-all. If you do calf tissue work in isolation and you do nothing else, you're not going to improve long-term, because you haven't figured out why the calf is tight, and you haven't addressed some of the other issues that you got to address as well. Okay, but I wanted to mention it because it is part of the equation. Okay? Want to go through dorsiflexion?
Yeah.
So that was hardware of the foot. Mentioned a little bit of tissue work to open up the calf. Hardware of the midfoot to get that moving. Now we're going to talk about the ankle, because this is really, let's be real, everyone wants to know how to open up their ankles. First step, get rid of shoes that lift your heel off the ground. After that, this stuff.
So, different ways to approach the ankle. A lot of things, so I used to work on my calves all the time. They used to get tight all the time. Once you start doing the right thing, once you start addressing mobility of the joint and moving better, then they tighten up less. So I haven't actually done any tissue work myself for the longest time, because things just don't get tight as you work on things. One principle that we're going to talk about is just going to end range in your ankle, seeing where end range is and exploring that end range. We're also going to talk about a few ways to get things active at end range. So we're actually going to produce force in the position that that's desirable for us. And that's kind of a general principle for mobility work these days, that if you want to get into a position, put yourself in the position, generate tension there, and try to fight into that position. That's one huge principle, right? We're trying to actually signify that we're stable and safe in that position, and that's going to be huge for our body, right? So again, this is not the be-all end-all. These are a couple ways that we can start to put our ankle at end range and start to get active at that end range. One of my favorite ways to actually work on people's ankles, we have a 4x4 piece of wood in the clinic, and we'll put it up these stall bars on the wall. So we can actually put it at an incline to whatever level we want. And just getting people actually walking up and down this, and then gradually putting them more uphill over time. Because if you think about it, that's kind of what the natural function of the ankles are, that shock absorption, giving us that freedom to actually walk up stuff, over stuff, all that kind of thing.
That's why we have the 1.1 beam. The difference between this one is that you can elevate it, and that's why we do that, so that you can work on hip stability and balance while putting your ankle closer to the position of restriction, because that makes a difference. Your hip has to know what to do to protect the ankle in all these different positions. So if you put the ankle in the position that most people are restricted in, and you're forcing your brain to work on your hip stability, we'll talk about it more when we get into the beam stuff, but that's why we want to be able to angle the beam. So that's why I find that important.
And that's the thing. A lot of times when we don't have that nice kind of stability at the foot, you're going to see everything in the lower leg tighten up even more, just try to get you stability. So a big thing is, it's not this in isolation. It's work on the parts, but then work on the interaction of the parts. Work on that software after, because that's going to ingrain everything and make it more permanent. So one way to do it, I found this is a fairly tolerable way for people. So going down to this like crouched position type of thing. Now again, putting something underneath your knee if you want, making it comfortable for you. Anything that we do throughout these next few mobilizations, if it hurts, just back off a little bit, don't do it, etc.
We have these little mat cutouts, so if you're kneeling down and it hurts on your knee or your ankle, you take these little pieces of mat and you can put it under your knee. That's what they're here for. There's probably stacks of them kind of scattered about.
So I'll let everybody have a chance to get some of those, and then we'll go through the ankle a little bit.
So we're going to go through 3 progressions, 3 different ways to mobilize your ankle into dorsiflexion. So you might find one of these resonates more than the other, but they're just kind of different levels and different tools to do the same job.
And I'll talk about things that I also do in my training to make it a little bit more intense or bring it to the level, so some progressions. So as you can see, my foot's slightly behind my knee here, and that works well for me to actually get right over top. I'm trying to gain leverage over this ankle. So what I'm trying to do is actually get like my chest and my arm, almost my armpit into that ankle. And now I'm actually, it's almost like I'm rocking into the ankle, right? So at the start, what I like doing is using external cues. So if you can use your hands here, and if I was in this position and I was like, hey, I want to reach over and touch that thing in front of me or grab it, how would I do that, right? If you try to keep your heel on the ground and reach in for that object, that's going to drive you into your end range ankle. At that end range, you can first start by just going there and then backing off a little bit. So again, kind of get right in this crouch position, reach, keep the heel on the ground, reach in for that object, really reach, pretend it's just out of your reach, and then back off. We'll try that one more time. Pick something on the floor that's just out of your reach, reach in towards it, and then back off. Now, doesn't really matter what this side is doing. I'm just keeping the ankle down. So I'm trying to actually get right over top my body so I can actually use that to lever my ankle. I'm trying to put pressure through the knee, basically. Now, a lot of the times I'll actually put an object out here, I'll reach for it, and I'll pick something up here. So I'll pick up a kettlebell, for instance. And that's really going to, at my end range, kind of provide more leverage for me to work into that ankle. And once I pick it up, it's going to really light things up, and I'm going to be forced to stabilize in an end range position. Now, another thing we can do is once we go to end range, so if you reach again, we're going to find out where your limit is, and then we're going to try to drive all of your toes, especially the base of the toes, into the ground for 5 seconds. So reach to your end range, keep the heel on the ground, drive all those toes into the floor. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now back off, reach again to your limit. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're actually going to try to pick all of your toes up. They're not going to move, but just try to pick them up at end range. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let go. And we'll do one of those each again. So reach to your end range again, reach to your limit. Now try to drive all those toes into the floor. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and back off a little bit. Reach down range again. Try to touch that thing in front of you. Once you're there, try to pick up all your toes off the ground. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So what that is doing is just lighting up the front of the ankle and the back of the ankle. So anterior chain and the posterior chain. And that's just getting us working at that end range. A lot of that is these are just little principles and tools we can use so we can get into the end range position, be active there. You can go to the extreme. You can pick up a weight there, like I said, drive into the ground, create tension. You're trying to kind of figure out where that end range, produce some tension there, trying to almost make it more permanent, kind of own that position. So are you getting a pinch in the front? Yeah, so oftentimes we have to backtrack a bit. Now, are you also getting a stretch in the back? Okay, so that's telling you you're getting a little bit of impingement in the joint. So we can backtrack from there, find a less aggressive position. We can use things like mobilization with movement, like a banded mobilization. So there's different ways we can backtrack with that. But that's something to note, right? Because ideally we don't ram into and through a pinch every time.
Yeah, if you're getting a pinch, you don't want to constantly go into that pinch. So chances are, like, say you're in the clinic, you're like, okay, I'm getting a pinch every time I go into that. The first thing I'm going to do is let's do tissue work on your calf, on the front of your shin. Let's get you balancing on a beam for 5 minutes, and we'll try it again and see if you still get the same pinch. And try and see if you can troubleshoot, because essentially this is the main bone of your ankle, okay, your talus. This is your distal tib and fib. This is essentially what your ankle joint looks like. Okay, it's like a fist with a U, and it should be able to move like this. If you get a pinch at the front, so anything that happens to your ankle that reduces that space underneath that U and on top of here, that goes like this, will create a pinch there. So instead of being able to go over that bone, you're pinching into it. that can be because anything that crosses the ankle in terms of muscles, if they're tight, they reduce that space. So if your calf's really tight, you're not going to have as much space there. If the front of your shin, the fascia and the muscle are tight, you're not going to have as much space. Okay, so sometimes you have to create a bit more space, whether that's by releasing the muscles or doing some sort of joint mobility work, right? Like manual therapy, if you go to physio, or using bands. We don't really talk about the bands because what we found was a slightly wrong position of the band when you're doing banded moves can actually negate the whole mobilization. So we don't really talk about them because oftentimes you don't need to get there if you're doing the right stuff. But essentially the goal is create more space and then work into that mobilization. So you don't want to go, if you're hitting a hard pinch every time, you need to do other stuff before you go back and do these end range mobilization. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, if you have the clearance there, because I often do it with a 50-pound slam ball or something like that to give me more load to kind of push into that mobility, but you have to have joint clearance in order for that to be productive. So even though you're putting a load to compress that, if you have clearance of the joint and it moves like it's supposed to, that load can actually help you get a little bit deeper into range. So if it's comfortable, if it doesn't give you a pinch, then usually it's fine.
Like I said, I like to pick up a load in front of me because the load is not necessarily just to put more force through, but it's to actually get you to stabilize in that position too. So I'll pick it up and my whole body's like, oh, I better actually really get over top of that and find my position here. Because if I'm half-assing it, I'm not going to get there. So again, use it. You wouldn't just go right there with somebody, but yeah, it can be very beneficial.
Now, so if with that first one, when someone goes down here, we get this often, this knee hurts. I can't bend this knee, or this is uncomfortable and that's what's stopping me. What you can do is you can take, we don't have a box here, but if you had like a box squatting box and you put it up something like this, you could do it where you're going in and out in that position, right? And that gets rid of that knee being in flexion with my full load. So you can do that as well. Obviously something probably a little bit less high, but that's another way to modify that if the knee that you're bending is what gives you the issue more so than the ankle. Okay? Awesome. You want to go through squat?
One more. Try to lift up your toes, even though they don't lift.
They probably won't lift, but
yeah, so that's going to light up. Basically, your tibialis anterior, the front of your shin, is going to activate when you try to do that, and that's what we're trying to get. Yeah, so you're trying to. Yep. Yeah, you're going to exactly. Okay. It's almost a picture like you're trying to strengthen into that position by doing that.
Hip restriction? In what sense? Yep. Yeah, so the next one we're going to do is a squat, and that can be a good one for people if you're able to get into that position comfortably. And it might even be an assisted squat, where you're in a squat and you're holding on to like a railing or a post or something, and then you're working into that position. All we're trying to do is find a position where you can comfortably go in and out of end range and spend time there. So you might have to search for whatever position jives best with you. If you can't get into a squat comfortably, then the kneeling one or an assisted squat where you're holding on to someone or something might be the better one. But the idea is touch end range and then out, in, out. Try and work into that by just spending time at end range, because that's the signal your body needs to expand that end range.
Yeah, exactly. More the principle behind it. Find a position that works for you, because yes, some of these might not work right away, but these are also goals that you can work towards. So the next one we're going to do, again, this might not be right for everybody either, but a squat. So if we actually go from the bottom up, we can try to, this is almost like a little test, but we'll see if we're able to find that squat position as we rock into it. So if we bring our knees down to the ground and we try to push ourselves back into the squat, we're going to see if we can find a nice position here where we can keep our heels on the ground. Now again, it might not be right for everybody. Well, a good way to do it in the squat though is to provide those. I like to reach around. Again, I'm like, if you think about what babies do and humans when they're learning to move, it's all about environmental cues. So what I'm trying to do is get my reach on, right? Get my armpit over this knee, reach. Try to touch that thing that's just out of your reach. Even if you lift up a little bit, that's okay too. Right? I'm just kind of playing in my ankle joint here. Go to the other side, reach. Again, you can let the heel come off the ground a little, or you can try to keep it down. And I kind of rock in and out of that position. Go over to the other side, reach. Try to actually touch something. And back off. And again, we'll go to the other side. So the squat's a great way to actually get over top and into our ankle joint. Now again, might not be right for everybody. A weight can provide some assistance here, and that can also allow you to get a bit more leverage over top of it. So I'm holding a small weight, 15 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, whatever. I'm able to actually use that leverage to my advantage and get into my ankles here. So again, we might have to backtrack, work on the hips, work on the squat position, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. So one thing you're going to note here too is that what is our foot position like too, because a lot of times that's a way to actually get more range. So we're going to go like this and we're going to collapse in through there, and that's going to flatten my foot out, and that's going to allow me to get this position. The goal is to work on your ankle with a decent foot position too. So if you can get your arch in a good position as you work on your ankle, that's going to be more beneficial. Your ankle, you want to actually think about trying to go right through your ankle joint as opposed to trying to go around it. Because we can go around it on the outside or we can go around it on the inside. A lot of people, in that example, you're trying to go around your ankle on the inside, right? So your knee's kind of tracking. That's why on that ankle test, we sent our knee right over the middle of the foot, that middle toe. And that's kind of a good guide. And again, all we're trying to do here is put you in positions that require ankles to be at their end range. That's it. So again, we can choose whatever position we want and say our ankles at our end range, because ultimately we need these positions. We need our ankles to be able to move well to get into these desired positions. Then if we just train our desired positions over time, we keep our ankle range, right? So if you touch end range every day, like all you need to do is once you got it, then get into a squat. All right, I might just get down there, expose myself to that, and then I don't lose it over time. Yeah. I'm going to do one more higher level screen. Again, this might not be for everybody. I like showing this to the CrossFitters that I treat because it shows them kind of black or white. Can you get into like a position in your ankle that's similar to a pistol? Because a lot of them will come in and say, I'm doing, pistols are programmed every week. I'm doing hundreds of them. And then you'll test their ankles and be like, you don't have the ankle range for it. How are you accomplishing that? And then what we start to see is these compensations happen in their patterns. So what I'll do for this is just kind of a little screen I'll use. Again, more for the athletic population, CrossFitters, people who need a lot of ankle range. And if they can't do it, it's something they should actually work towards. So it's a test, but it's also a way to work on your ankles. What I try to do here is I go down to my knee, hands on the floor, leg out to the side. Now it's also going to test your extensibility here, so that might be a limiting factor. But what we try to do here is I'm right up on my toes in the back, and what I'm doing is using my hands to rock myself into it, right? So I'm actually rocking back, and I'm slowly trying to keep my foot forward to the point where I can just barely touch on to the ground, right? So that's kind of the point there. Can I touch onto the ground with my heel and keep my foot straight and keep my arch relatively in a good position? And can I balance here? And oftentimes I'll actually use this as a mobilization. What I'll do often is put a heavy kettlebell on the floor here and use it as an anchor. For people who are very close to being able to do that but can't quite do it, hold onto the anchor and kind of guide yourself down. That gives you some leverage. You can hold onto it with both hands, and that way you can kind of really work into that end range. But if I see somebody try this and they get to here and then it's like, they just fall back every time, they're kind of nowhere near that position. And what you'll see to have to compensate again, what do we see happen? We see that foot want to spin all the way up to the side, right? So if you can keep it straight here and get into these positions relatively well and kind of own that, that's pretty good. You can stay right on top of your ankle. Another thing to note when you're working on this is, can you maintain even pressure through your foot? And we'll talk about tripod foot next. But when you put people at end range ankle, you'll often see that they're really leaning back on their heels because they're not right over top of their foot. So it's something to note in whatever position you're in, your foot is a guide, and if you can really get to the point where you can anchor your foot on the ground, you're going to get the most out of it too.
So that's a high level screen, right? Being able to go into a modified class size like that, if you run on a regular basis and you're serious about running, I think you should be able to do that, right? Because that shows you that you have enough ankle range of motion that you have travel in your suspension, right? You have a safety buffer in terms of positioning. You have enough room that your ankle can express normal human range of motion. You know, another good screen is being able to go into a squat where your feet are directly together. Can you get into a squat and be relaxed down there? That's a good master screen. For a lot of people, we don't use that as one of the main screens because most of the time people almost don't want to do that. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to. It's just, you know, if you do a screen and no one can do it, it's not a very good screen. But end goal, if you want to know, okay, well, what's the limit? How much is enough ankle range that I don't have to work on it anymore? Can you do a squat with your feet glued together without your heels lifting up? That's a good way to tell whether you have enough or whether you should probably keep working on it. Okay? So that's ankle dorsiflexion. Like, we're just trying to give you tools, right? So the whole point of those 3 progressions was the kneeling, the squat, and the modified Cossack are 3 different tools you can use to spend time at end range with your ankle. Get ready to heel lifted shoes, you're already doing plenty of work to work on your ankle mobility. Okay? Then the next step is, do you want to work towards a standard? And if you do, these are options in combination with calf tissue work, because that can help as well. Okay? So the next ones we're going to go through. The back part of the calf can be a problem, can be very tight. The front part of the lower leg can be a huge problem in a lot of people. Okay? I think the main reason it's a problem is because if you heel strike when you run, which shoes are not designed to do, but running shoes allow us to do that, they have cushioning allowing. Every single time your foot hits the ground, the front of your shin has to eccentrically contract to lower your foot down to the ground. This is never supposed to happen, but it happens a lot. And so everyone develops insane amounts of shin tension in their tibialis anterior, right? Shin splints, MTSS, compartment syndrome. These are all byproducts of prioritizing quantity over quality, right? But for a lot of people, what I found is that dorsiflexion, restoring the ability to do this, can actually be helped quite a bit by releasing the front of the shin, which I never would have thought of, right? But 2 things made me realize that it kind of makes sense. Number 1, if this is the ankle, the back part getting tight can decrease that space, but the front part can too, right? If you have a ton of fascial tension pulling you down, you're decreasing the space there. And the other thing I realized was that if your tibia is tight and locked down, it cannot fire to stabilize your dorsiflexion. So in order to get a position, you both have to have enough length of the muscle in the back, but also strength of the muscle in the front to hold you there, to hold you stable. If you're not, even if you have that range, but you're not stable there, your brain says, you're not allowed to go there. Okay, so both are important. Now to release tibia, I'll show you guys 2 things. Number 1, everyone should be able to point their toes and sit on the heels. Okay? If this feels like your ankle's going to blow up, you've got some work to do. And that's okay. Everyone has to start somewhere. Right? So the first, hey, if you can't do this, well, I want you to try it and see what hurts that stop you from doing it. If it just feels like your ankles are about to blow up, it's really uncomfortable, then maybe your starting point is putting a rolled up towel underneath here and trying that, right? So that you're not having to go to end range. Or maybe it's you're sitting back, holding for a second, and then relaxing. Sitting back. But the goal is to get to a point where you can be comfortable doing this. Now, if you can't, one thing you can work on is you can open up, okay, shin bone right here, like a fairly sharp bone. On the outside of the shin bone, on the upper 2/3, is a muscle called tibialis anterior. It's very tight and very gnarly in people. Okay, to release that, very easy way. Knee goes on the floor, so cross fold just outside your shin bone. And you can roll like this if you want, but I find the easiest way is put your knee on the floor so you can adjust how much pressure is going through there. Pick one spot and pump your ankle a bunch of times. Usually you hear a bunch of moans and groans with this because it sucks for a lot of people. Okay? Outside, just outside of your shin bone. So not on the bone, but in that little compartment of tissue just outside the bone. You take one squat and you hump. Okay? As much pressure as you want. Maybe there's hardly any pressure. And then you pick a slightly different spot and then you hump the ankle. Okay? You do that in a bunch of squats. And if you want to see how big of a difference it can make, do it on one side, not the other, and then retest this. Because in 30 seconds of doing tissue work to release some of that fascia and that tissue and muscle tension, this can feel different. Okay, but this is a good thing to try and be able to work towards. And this is another, as we get into the hip, one big part is trying to build a repertoire of positions that you can use instead of sitting in chairs. This can be one of them. If you only get 30 seconds before you have to move and shift, that's okay. But eventually, you should be able to be here comfortably for like 5 minutes. That was a random number I picked arbitrarily, but this should not be a position that gives you pain. Put it that way. If it does, then you have a bit of work to do to restore plantar flexion. And I like positions like this because you can't cheat. It's like it's a known quantity. Can you do it or can you not? And if you can't, here's what you can work on. Open up the front of the shin. Change how you run, which we'll get into at the end because that's the bigger reason why your shins are sort of jacked up. The amount of, when I finished my physio degree, I worked for a university and I was in charge of the track and field team. The amount of athletes, cross-country distance athletes, that I saw getting fasciotomies where someone sliced the front fascia up because there was so much pressure there, makes my heart hurt now because I realized they were just all running poorly. And everyone was saying, oh, you got the carpal syndrome, perfect, slice, release the pressure, don't change how they run, and it just gets irritated all over again. Right? So compartment syndrome, stress fractures, no other animal on the planet, that posted this the other day was awesome, no other animal except for greyhounds and horses get stress fractures. The only reason they get them is because of humans. Right? That means you're moving, you prioritize moving more than how you're moving. That's all it means. Okay? So anyway, that's tib ant and plantar flexion. The last one is big toe. So if you want to mobilize your big toes and get some big toe extension back, all you have to do is put your big toes like that, and then an easy way to mobilize them is kind of like this. Now if that hurts, I'm not saying you have to put your full body weight and sit into it. Like maybe it's just sitting back and then off. Oscillating. Tension on, tension off. On, off. Maybe it's just very gentle. If your big toes, when you do this, want to go towards the other one, maybe you got to manually align your big toe or wear toe spreaders and then work on it. Okay? And maybe it's just going in and out, but trying to get that big toe to extend. If you want a fun drill to work on, start here and then slowly go down, letting your knees just touch, and then come back up. So it's a controlled drill, but it also works on your big toes extending. Okay? Now if you hit a hard block where it pinches, maybe you got a little bit of work to do to open up underneath your foot to reduce tension in your big toe flexor so that your big toe can extend more. But this is a good way to mobilize the big toe. You just kind of sit back here and just kind of hang out. Right? Netflix and whatever mobility work. Okay? So I think that's pretty much it for hardware, right? So we do it quick, but we have to get through this stuff quick to be able to cover all of what we want to cover. Like I said, I'm here at lunch, so if anyone has questions, just come up and ask me. So we covered the bottom of the foot, the muscles and the joints. We covered the midfoot. We talked about calf, opening up calf tissue. We talked about the ankle with dorsiflexion, 3 progressions where it was kneeling, squat, and then the Cossack. We talked about plantar flexion, being able to sit on your heels with your toes pointed, opening up tib anterior. And we talked about big toe, kind of getting your big toe and being able to extend. Once again, spend time barefoot. When you walk around, your big toe extends. Okay, get out of shoes. Most shoes don't let your big toe move. That's why our big toe starts to get really stiff. Yep. Yeah, I don't know the exact. Do you know what the exact number is for that? Yeah. Yeah, I look for. I should probably know that number, but when I look at people's big toe like passively, I just move it and I almost I look and I should be able to see people do this. That's the way I think of it. Can the base of your big toe and can your big toe extend to the point where your foot is almost like vertical? There is a number. I'm sure if you look for a number, there is one, and I can't remember. That's what we're getting in next. Yeah, short foot is underrated, and we're going to talk about that. This is all hardware. This is open up the joints. Yeah, sorry I don't know an actual number for it. That's just what I look for. Can you do this? If they can't, then I work on it. But most people's big toes are so, you'll get most people, and they'll go here, and then to get higher, they'll have to go like this, because they just have none. And most of that is because the shoes that we wear don't allow our big toe to move. That's why shoes have a toe spring. So if you put a shoe flat on a table, the front of the toe will angle up. Why is that? Because the toe part of the shoe cannot bend. It doesn't flex. So shoe companies have to put a rocker so that you can rocker off your foot and go like this, because you can't walk normally like a human and extend your big toe. That's why spending time barefoot is very important, or using shoes like Vibrams, or even a lot of the big companies that are making good barefoot-ish shoes or more human, natural shoes need to be better, right? Like Vivos need to be wider. A lot of other shoe companies need to have less rigidity in their shoe. They need to allow your toes to fan out instead of getting crushed together. So there's still a lot of work to do in the footwear industry, but if you just make your shoes a little bit wider and a little more flexible every time you buy new shoes, you will gradually mobilize your foot. And it's almost, spending time barefoot is free and anyone can do it. So starting to do that more frequently and outdoors on different surfaces is a very powerful force to restore your feet. And that would be the biggest piece of advice I can give. If you want to if you're like, how can I mobilize my foot everywhere? Just don't wear shoes. Boom, you mobilize your feet everywhere if you're moving around. Okay? So that was the hardware part. Opening up joints, giving you guys tools to be able to open up joints that might be stiff. Now we're getting into the software, and we're only going to talk about one thing. We're going to go through short foot, how to contract the intrinsic muscles of your foot to create a nice stable foot, and what to think of in order to position your foot before you even fire those muscles, right? You have to get your hip to organize your foot and make sure your weight's distributed evenly. Then you can fire the muscles of the foot to create like the short foot or doming or suction cup effect. But we want to go through that right now. We'll do a partner drill, take a break, and then we get into the hip. Okay? So let's get everyone standing up. So do you want to explain it?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
So in the manual you'll see demo short foot. So what short foot is, initially you mentioned Yonda. Basically it's when you're contracting all the intrinsic muscles of the foot. So all those muscles that originate and end in the foot. So it's not talking about everything upstream, the lower leg and all of that. There's a lot of these lower leg muscles that actually end up attached into the foot. Our goal here is to actually contract everything in the foot itself. But the position you do this in matters. So for instance, if I was actually doing it in more of a collapsed foot position and I'm trying to activate my foot, it's not going to go too well. Again, that core of the foot, that foot needs to be in a good position to be able to access its core. So like we talked about before, you have everything upstream of your feet control where your feet are in space. So the big thing here is to try to find somewhere in the middle where you can get your arch where you want it. Somewhere in the middle where you can see your arch. We're going to start with one foot at a time and just kind of put our foot in front of us. Now just to demo it, what we're trying to do here, this is an important concept, and the way I look at it, because once I explain this to people I treat, then I can kind of cue it up again, and I call it tripod foot, right? So short foot, tripod foot, doming, whatever you want to call it. The reason I call it tripod foot is I'm looking for 3 points of contact, and we call it 50-50-50 rule. So if we look at base of the big toe, so not the tip of the big toe, it's the base of it, base of the little toe, you can even look at like the webbing. I like to get a lot of people to look at that area, and then the heel. So if we think about the 50-50 rule for the front part of the tripod, 50 here, 50 there, 50 big toe, 50 little toe. Now, we want to actually apply even pressure into the ground through those 2 points. And you can see that if I was over here and my foot was kind of collapsed inward, now I'm probably 90-10. I'm almost lifting up over here, right? So I've just broken that rule. Now if I push my knee out all the way over here, I'll pop this up, right? I'm 90-10. So if we abide by that kind of principle of 50-50 between those 2 points of contacts in the front, and then also that heel. So between the front 2 points and the heel, 50-50, right? If I'm back on my heel and I'm lifting up here, I'm not getting that. If I'm too far here, my heel's coming up. So just kind of abide by that tripod principle, and that gives you a good guideline.
If you want to get an idea what it feels like to put 50-50 front and back, put both your feet together, close your eyes, lean forward onto your forefoot as far as you can without falling, lean backwards onto your heels, find right in the middle. Okay, when you close your eyes and you shift your body weight, you're essentially trying to find the midpoint where you have 50% on the toes, 50% on the heels. That's where 50-50 is. So if you ever have to recalibrate, an easy way to do it.
And why do we talk about that? That's when we're the most stable. So whenever we need to be stable on our feet, we want to use these rules. So if we're doing a squat in the gym, if we're training, if we're doing balancing, right? If we're balancing on our foot. If somebody's trying to push us over, right? Somebody randomly comes up to you and wants to push you. It's like that's where we're going to get the most out of our foot in terms of gaining stability on the ground, right? So when we're going to do it in isolation. But if I'm coaching a squat, I'll say, okay, so the tripod rule, 50-50, and they understand that. So we'll say, okay, rule number one, set your tripods in place, and then we'll go through some other cues in the squat. Break out your hips, drive the knees out, whatever it might be. But if they break the tripod rule along the way, it shows me that they're losing that ideal stability at the ground. If they're squatting and their knees come in, we've just broken that tripod rule. So it's a way to kind of guide your movement in any given exercise or every given movement when we want our feet planted. And again, that's kind of what people were fighting for even in that balance drill, when people's feet were going this, and then they found the middle, and that's when they found their balance. When you find your balance in the middle, that's naturally happening. We're getting the most access to the muscles in the foot that can actually keep us in a stable position. So what do? After we know the tripod rule, all we're thinking about doing for short foot is pushing those 2 points of contact into the floor. So if you look at me from the side here, when I push in, my foot actually shortens up a little bit. It contracts, right? But what I don't want to think about pushing is the tips of my toes. Again, it's that base of the toe. If you're trying to push the tips, a lot of people will kind of curl up like that. And then we're not getting that stability that we need.
No curling, you're driving the toes. A couple of cues work for people. Push the toes straight down on the floor. That works really well for a lot of people. Okay, you always want to see your toenails. Your toenails disappear, you're turning it into a long toe flexor exercise, and you don't want your toes to flex. You want them to push down. Another good cue for some people is bring the ball of your foot towards your heel. Seems very abstract, but for some people, that cues it nicely. Okay, but what you should see is after you've organized your foot, so it's 50-50, 50-50, and you've created a bit of torque at your hip to create a bit of an arch, then you can cinch up all the muscles of your foot. And if you see your foot actually physically getting shorter, it means that you're essentially creating like a suction cup with your foot. Okay, so everyone try this a few times. You're not going to be perfect at it right away. You might find that by doing that, your toes get pulled off alignment, right? If you have a bit of a bunion or you have an angulation there, that's okay. It's all workable. But you want to be able to essentially flex your feet, right? So organize your hips, distribute the load evenly, then flex your feet, drive the kind of toes into the floor, and create almost like a suction cup. Iron Davis calls it doming. Some people call it short foot. Whatever you want to call it, just make sure your toes aren't flexing and bending. They're just pushing down into the floor. So try a few of those.
I think about it too, like from yoga you'll hear rooting, but again, all we're trying to do is gain stability from the floor with our feet.
Let's do 2 feet, we'll do a 5-second hold, okay? So both feet hip width apart, you have to just kind of take a couple steps to kind of organize. So feet are down, 50, 50, 50, 50. Okay, so make sure your weight's evenly distributed between front and back, side to side. Organize the hips a little, right? Don't push them all the way to the edge, but don't let them cave in. Find kind of a midpoint where your foot's organized, you can see the arch. Now what I want you to do is contract the muscles of your foot. So push the toes into the floor and hold. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then relax. And if when you relax, your foot almost like lengthened and kind of splayed out, that's a good thing. Let's try that again, but this time we're going to hold both feet and then we're going to slowly shift over to one side. And what I want you to try and do is keep the foot contracted the whole time and don't let it kind of let go. Okay? We're doubling the load on that foot. So if you cramp up, that's okay. It just means your foot is freaking out a bit because it's never been asked to do this, or your foot's weak, right? And it might take a little bit of work with the lacrosse ball to actually reset all these muscles so you can recruit them again. But at least we want to give you the base foundation of, okay, what do I need to focus on as I'm working on this stuff? Okay, so both feet, okay, organize the hips, distribute the weight, contract the foot, okay, hold, and now slowly keep that foot contracted and pick a side and shift over to that side and try not to let the arch collapse inward. Try and keep that foot contracted. Okay, hold it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. Do the same thing again. Contract with both feet, and we're going to shift over to the other side and see if you find one side harder than the other. Okay, so organize the feet, distribute the load, organize your hips. Okay, now contract, short foot. Now slowly switch over towards the other side and hold there for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. For a lot of people, when you actually contract the foot and generate like a real good amount of stability from the foot itself, you can feel a lot more stable because your foot's not wobbling side to side as much. Your foot's now gripping the ground, almost like it's grabbing on physically to the ground, and it can give you a good amount of stability. And that's for stability focused stuff, right? Like one thing we forgot to say one time was that you're not supposed to do this when you're running or walking. You're supposed to do this like if you're doing a squat or a max deadlift. Create some sort of short foot contraction, give you some stability. And it's directly related to the strength you're trying to have, you're trying to express, right? If you just have a bar and you're just grooving the deadlift pattern, you don't need a maximum contraction of your foot. But if you're doing a 1 rep max deadlift, you should probably be contracting your foot hella strong because it'll give you more stability that you can kind of play on upstream.
Balance as well, and you're going to find that once you can find that position, again, it's achieving that position and then maintaining it with that. It's just use enough so you can balance. You know, you don't need to go full effort, but it can turn into a maximal effort exercise if you want to start building that arch up too. So when can you do this? So the importance of this is
all the time. Grocery store lineup, standing, it's like anywhere you can work on this.
You can do it where if you're in the kitchen, like that's where it becomes like the more. And again, if you're taking your shoes off, it's hard to do it in a lot of shoes because you can't kind of achieve the same thing. So doing it all the time just allows you to kind of work this. Using this in your training, if you're training with bare feet or with minimalist shoes or in something that allows you to do this, then every exercise becomes a foot exercise, and that's a good concept to think about. Because if you're using your feet mindfully during every exercise, you're going to build up that strength over time. But the other part of it is just making sure that tripod rule is very, very important, because then that makes sure everything upstream, if your tripod is maintained when you want it to be maintained, it means everything upstream is helping you to maintain that position, right? If you're trying to maintain the tripod and every time you squat you go over like this and you shift out of that tripod, again, we can use that as kind of a smoke signal to see what's going on, and it can really guide us on the movement.
Okay, we're gonna try one drill. This is a partner drill. You're gonna stand on one leg with a partner, grab a lacrosse ball. I want you to focus on trying to hold short foot for a full 60 seconds. Okay, you're gonna throw the ball back and forth. At the start, just throw it directly to them. But at the end, like the second half of that minute, I want you to make them hold short foot, but also have to reach to catch the ball. Okay, so you have to kind of make it a little more difficult as it goes through it. So I'll say go. Okay, you do one leg. Then I'll say go again. We'll do the other leg for 60 seconds, and then we're going to take a break. Okay? 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, try and focus on that short foot. Seconds left. Contract that foot. Push the toes into the floor. If you have to reset, that's cool. Oh, 20 seconds left. Squeeze your foot. 10 seconds, then we switch. You gotta make him reach more than that. This is way too easy. There we go. Okay, switch feet. Other foot. There you go. Okay, go. Keep that foot squeezed. Always be thinking about the foot primarily and catching the ball. If your foot cramps, it's not a bad thing. It means you're flexing muscles that don't know what to do, and that's okay. There you go. "30 seconds. You're welcome. Oh, behind the back. Fancy. Like it. 10 seconds. Oh. All right, that's it. 5-minute break. So right now it's 10 after 12. How about we get through 20 minutes, half an hour of the hip, and then we'll go on lunch. Is that cool? 5-minute break. When we come back and the music's off, have a seat. We'll get into hip. And if you have questions, come find me or Mike. We'll be up here.